As a nation, the fishing islands were a big part of what held the nation together. Everybody fished before the colonial system started to roll in. The fish were who we are. You couldn't depict one from the other. It was survival. It was trade and commerce. It was everything. The fish were everything.
The Saugeen Ojibway Nation, or SON, and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, more commonly known as the MNRF, have a long history that was characterized by conflict and disagreement regarding issues related to the fisheries in Lake Huron.
Paul Jones from the Chippewas and Nawash, and I'm a fisherman, commercial fisherman. Have been for about 30 years or more anyway. I was an iron worker by trade, so when I came home back from out working iron, the ministry imposed a ban on the Chippewas and Nawash from selling, so I went, got a boat and some nets and went just to say, I don't think you have the right to charge us, so because we never give it up. We never gave up the fishery, so all the treaties and whatever transpired, we never ever give up our right to fish and hunt. So why would you give away what you're putting food on the table with? So that was a kind of belief I always had, and that's the belief I got off my ancestors, and that's the belief I passed down today, is that we still never gave it up.
In the past, SON was excluded from most decisions about fisheries management, including fish stocking, and were not invited to participate in research conducted by binational management agencies in the Great Lakes Basin. The relationship between MNRF and the SON can generally be categorized into 3 time periods. 1. Fisheries-related conflict pre-2000. 2. The transition to joint fishery governance from 2000 to 2018. And lastly, the 3rd period, which is today, where SON and the MNRF are jointly doing research using a new method of a tuptamuk or two-eyed seeing. Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall describes the process as learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of mainstream knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use these eyes together for the benefit of all. The purpose of this research project is to determine whether lake trout are contributing to recent declines in lake whitefish. The 2 objectives of the research are to determine if lake trout predation is a significant factor on lake whitefish, and to determine whether there is potential for resource competition between the 2 species.
Ani, Sydney Najuan Dijnakaz, Niashingdaming, Donchaba, Chichak and Dodem. So my name is Sydney Najuan, and I live here in Niashingdaming and have my whole life. And my totem is a crane. And the totem of the people sort of define who you are or what your purpose is. And so being Chichak or crane is to get all the information, to gather the information and to make better decisions overall. So that has been our place in the community for forever. Our family moved from Nawash in Owen Sound back in 1857, I believe. The surrender was 1854. My grandfather, he as a child actually grew up just right up near Hope Bay. The nation is made up between Saugeen and Nawash, and there wasn't a fishery until the colonial system came into play. And then once the colonial system came into play, it turned into, you would say, leasing sections of water and islands and whatnot. So the colonials coming in were all trying to get a piece of the action. They had to feed their families also. So the fish were just an invaluable source for everybody.
My name is Aubrey Erbschot, 18 years old, Indigenous. I'm from Nawash Reserve. My grandpa's a fisherman. I'm pretty sure his brothers are fishermen too. My mom used to tell me stories about how she would go out with him on the boat, and all of my aunts would go with him, and that's how they learned how to fish, gut a fish too. My mom was pretty impressed when I first learned how to gut my fish because she remembers doing it with my papa when she was younger.
My name is Erin Dunlop. I'm a research scientist with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. I work out of Trent University with the aquatic research section of MNRF. I'm supervising a master's student, Courtney Taylor, that's working on the Western science component of the Two-Eyed Seeing project. I first started working with SON back in 2018, and it was actually SON that approached us, the ministry and myself, when they saw a call for research proposals by the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. So SON was interested in potentially doing a project with us and putting in a research proposal to seek some funding. And really what kind of brought us together was the declines in lake whitefish that are occurring in Lake Huron, including in SON's traditional territory. Basically, at the heart of this study is looking at whether whether lake trout are contributing to the declines in lake whitefish. SON harvesters were noting that they were seeing lake whitefish in the stomachs of larger lake trout. And so this raised concerns in the community that potentially lake trout were causing the declines of lake whitefish. The other part of what we're looking at with our Western science component of the Two-Eyed Seeing research study is we're measuring something called stable isotopes from fish scales that are collected in Lake Huron. Because this is a Two-Eyed Seeing research study, we also have the Indigenous knowledge component of the project. And that's where knowledge holders in the SON community, including harvesters, elders, other community members, are being interviewed and asked about changes that they've seen in the lake with respect to, where fish are living, what they're eating, in order to further understand, the extent to which lake trout might be contributing to the declines of whitefish.
Ani Nagan Wewe Don Indigenous Wabjeshi Dodem Neashingaming Donjba. Hello, my name is Alexander Duncan. My spirit name is Sound of Coming Thunder. I'm a member of the Martin clan, and my home community is here, the Chippewas of Nawash, Unceded First Nation. Following my master's degree at Lake Huron University, I began working for the Fisheries program here again as a research coordinator in 2020, where I stayed for about a year until I left to do my doctorate, what I'm doing now. I would say there's a number of issues facing the Saugeen fishery. Like all small-scale fisheries, a lot of our folks are getting older, and there's not a lot of youth really jumping into the fishery. For a number of different reasons. I think maybe a disconnect from culture, a disconnect from the way we used to do things, but then there's also significant upfront costs to operating in a commercial fishery, So that's one issue. I think another large issue would be the numerous invasive species in the territory and non-native species. So we've witnessed large impacts from sea lamprey, which parasitized and took out a lot of our fish in the middle of the 1900s. There are a variety of other invasive species, and presently a lot of local sports clubs, sports fishing clubs, and the province stock non-native fish in our waters, so a number of different types of salmon, some trouts. They used to stock lake trout rehabilitatively in the area, and lake trout are technically native fish, but the strains that they were using were not native, and there's just this compounded interaction with all of these non-native fish on our native fish was really tough. So there's been declines, pretty serious declines in a number of native fish species. Already with our fish harvesters, they're on the water every day, so they're witnessing changes throughout their own lifetime, but then we have this sort of multi-generational knowledge where they're hearing stories from their fathers and uncles and aunts and family. So it's really important that we're working on figuring out why lake whitefish are declining and how we might be able to help them.
One of the real strengths of Saugeen knowledge is that this is knowledge that has been passed down through many, many generations. And it includes knowledge that goes so far back into history. So that kind of information is incredibly interesting and valuable. So there's that strength that we bring with Saugeen knowledge. There's also that close relationship between the knowledge holders and the waters, which creates this really strong understanding about what is going on out in the lake. And so if we look at the information that is contained within the Saugeen knowledge system, and then also take a look at the knowledge that we hold through the strong Western science approaches, which tend to be kind of reductionist, less holistic, but very powerful in ways of trying to understand certain components of what's going on in the ecosystem. For example, our use of the isotope study or the use of stomach content analysis, for example. So if we take a look and understand more about what's going on from the Western science perspective through those techniques, as well as what is understood through the Saugeen knowledge holders and the Saugeen knowledge system, then we gain such a powerful way of understanding what is going on out in Lake Huron and Georgian Bay.
To facilitate the sharing of knowledge in this two-eyed seeing process, researchers have adopted what is called the conversation method. The method is harmonious with Indigenous culture, given its roots are in oral traditions and storytelling. This is crucial in order to have inclusive and productive engagement in the academic world, which has become a growing theme in many research environments. The contemporary academic institution often operates within colonial agendas and has historically seldom made space for the inclusion or legitimization of differing ontologies and ways of knowing. Too often, best practices when working with Indigenous communities are regarded as checklists, stripping nuance of situations and not truly making sure that the outcomes of a project are best suited for all those involved. For the Anishinaabe of the Great Lakes, the pipe ceremony is a cultural cornerstone that recognizes and gives thanks for all of creation, often preceding other specific ceremonies and protocols. Having come together to find shared and meaningful goals in saving whitefish from further decline, Saugeen and the ministry laid the foundation to building a legitimate, mutually beneficial, and equitable partnership.
The Saugeen has always fished just about all the different types we have, and they were all used for different commodities or whatever. First, it would start out in very early spring. As soon as the ice left the harbor, we would be down at the harbor and catching rainbow. And that would last for maybe a week or two. And then you would see the whitefish start coming into the harbor. Once the whitefish started to come, then the herring were a mixture of that. You were always looking forward to the next different type of fish coming into. They didn't come into season exactly, but they came in a specific order, I guess due to food source, water temperature.
Another facet of research being conducted is the investigation into lake trout and lake whitefish stomach content.
So when a fish is collected in the field, the stomach of that fish is removed. So these are fish that come from harvesters, and they've come from all different parts of the lake where M&R and our partners are doing different sampling surveys. So these fish stomachs are placed in their own unique sample bag, and then they're brought back to the lab and placed in the freezer. At a later date, the samples are removed from the freezer, and typically they're thawed overnight. And then the crew comes in the morning and removes the stomach from the sample bag,
and they weigh that stomach with all of its contents. They then open up the stomach and basically look at what's inside. So here they identify individual prey items. So some of the prey items are more digested and difficult to identify, and the crew just does the best that they can. So sometimes you might only be able to identify that it's a fish, and other times you're able to identify that fish right down to the species level. So they take each of these prey items and they measure them and they weigh them as well. They also look at whether these stomachs are empty, because that can also tell us some important information, you know, whether these fish are sort of having full stomachs or not getting enough to eat. And once all of the prey items are removed from the stomach is weighed again. So we have the biomass of the contents within the stomachs. So that can give us a sense of how much prey and the weight of these prey items that these fish are eating, to give us a sense of how much energy the fish are actually deriving from the different prey groups.
The idea is to understand more about what's going on within the food chain out in Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. There's a lot of concerns about what the changes that are going on in the lake and the effects that that is having on the organisms that are out there trying to survive. And one of those key questions is about diet and what these, in our case, what whitefish and lake trout are eating. And there have been a lot of concerns that have come from community members about the effect of stocked lake trout on lake whitefish. And it seems like it's those larger lake trout that the fishers are cutting open and finding those large lake whitefish in.
Researchers have also been gathering samples of scales off these fish in order to determine the isotopic composition, or what the scales are made up of on an atomic level.
So for our project, we are looking at the stable isotope ratios from scales collected for lake trout and lake whitefish. So when we sample a fish out on the lake in the field, we remove some of the scales from the fish. So these are fish collected by harvesters and by our crews out conducting their monitoring programs on the lake. So we take these scales and we put them into a scale envelope where we record other information about the fish, such as the length of the fish and where it was captured. We then take these scale envelopes back to the lab, and that's where later we process them for stable isotopes. So what we do is we take these scale envelopes out, we take the scales out, we soak them in water overnight. We then carefully sort of wipe off any debris or dirt on the scales so that they're nice and clean. We then dry these scales in a drying oven, after which time we take the scales and we punch out the first 2 growth rings on the scales. So much like rings on a tree, scales form annual growth rings, so the scale is growing along with the fish. And so we don't want to include the first 2 years in our stable isotope analysis because the fish are eating very different things when they're sort of so small and tiny. And our project, we're just focusing on the isotopes for the juveniles and adults. So we take these scale samples with the centers punched out, and we weigh them and put them in these small little tin cups. And these tin cups are then shipped off to a specialized lab that actually does the stable isotope analysis for us. So with that, we're specifically looking at carbon-13 and nitrogen-15 stable isotope ratios. So with the stomach content analysis, you get a snapshot view of what that fish was eating over the last day or so. But with stable isotopes, when we look at stable isotopes from the scale samples especially, what we're getting is an integrated look at the fish's diet over the course of its life. So these 2 pieces of information, the information coming from the stomach contents and the information coming from the stable isotopes, they kind of tell you different things, but they're very complementary. So when we combine that with the Indigenous ecological knowledge interviews with SON members, this becomes a pretty powerful approach for really understanding the interactions between lake trout and lake whitefish.
You know, If you saw a Ministry of Natural Resources truck or car come into the community, there would be a lot of issues with that, just given the past history. But their commitment to work meaningfully and engage with us in a more ethical manner has really changed. And in my professional experience, however many years I've been doing it, it's really great to see.
To continue to be successful, we need elders and fish harvesters' perspectives, because they're out on the water doing the work, seeing what's out there. But then also the Fisheries office, who has other partners in work looking at the Western science perspective. I feel like if you're just getting one perspective, that's not getting enough, because like Western science, like they don't know our waters like our fishermen do, or like our elders do. They don't know the community like our elders do. So like I said, when you bring both together, it creates something even bigger, even better.
Although Indigenous ecological knowledge, or IEK, has been applied in fisheries research before, the applications of a two-eyed seeing approach are limited, despite the numerous Indigenous fisheries in the Great Lakes. However, recent and ongoing work across Canada can provide insight into developing this process. One example is a Pawtamawtaluk, a collaborative study among Mi'kmaq knowledge holders, local harvesters, academic researchers, and government scientists in the Bay of Fundy and Brador Lake in Nova Scotia. A two-eyed seeing approach can also be used to inform decision-making when data is incomplete or lacking, particularly at the local level. For example, it was revealed in a study conducted in British Columbia that local population declines in Dungeness crab went undetected by managers at regional scales, but was finally caught by combining IEK with simulation modeling in the absence of available fisheries independent data. Although there isn't many instances of this process being used within the Great Lakes, there is still hope for that to change going forward.
All I can say is that we hope for the best, but hope and reality are two different ends of the scale, and I don't know if there's any meeting in the middle with that. People will continue to fish if there's fish to be caught. I have no doubt about that. Because of the decline in the whitefish, we lost a number of fishermen, but it's in our blood to keep fishing.
I think this collaboration mostly came about over the immediacy of the lake whitefish declines. We're both working on similar things, us in the province, and I think from a logical standpoint, it just made sense. Right now in fisheries too, there's this large push towards better collaborations, more ethical engagement.
So some of what we're learning in this project so far is basically that lake trout and lake whitefish do interact. So coming into this project, I would say there was really a lot of skepticism about just the whole premise of our study and some of the concerns brought forward from the community that lake trout and lake whitefish were interacting, and that this could potentially be contributing to the declines of whitefish. And what we're seeing is that it's the larger lake trout that have more lake whitefish in their stomachs. And this is sort of, similar to what the Saugeen community members were telling us that they were seeing, and sort of what led to this work going forward in the first place. So using the two-eyed seeing approach, I think, has been really valuable, because it's allowed MNRF and Saugeen to come together and do research in an equitable way that really allows us to trust each other and to learn from one another. We haven't been able to have this type of relationship before. And I think prior to using two-eyed seeing, we really operated in different silos, and we weren't able to sort of freely come together and share what we were learning. I think as well, using a two-eyed seeing approach was important to Saugeen, because it allowed a way for us to really open up and listen to their concerns about lake whitefish, and to have their knowledge valued on an equal playing field with Western science. And so it's been incredibly valuable for me to learn about all of the knowledge that Saugeen has about lake whitefish and about the changes in the lake. I mean, they're out on the water, they're seeing things happening. And so I've been so incredibly grateful for the knowledge that they have shared with us. And so I think there is some learning that needs to be done. And hopefully this type of project kind of demonstrates just how valuable two-eyed seeing can be and how it really will allow us to kind of work better with Indigenous communities and do this work in a good way.
My name is Courtney Taylor. I'm a master's student at Trent University. I'm working on the Lake Trout and Lake Whitefish Interactions Project through the GLFC. The part of the project that I have appreciated the most is the in-person opportunities to learn from members of the Indigenous community and the elders. That's an experience that I won't get to have.
Why do you think it has taken so long for this research collaboration to have taken place?
Bullhead. Everybody's got this preconceived knowledge. That's how I kind of frame things. Everybody thinks, well, I know it better than the next guy, so what I say should go. And you don't have any collaboration between the groups to sit down and work through the problems, identify the problems, then figure out what can be done. So have we got all the answers? Probably not. You know, have they got all the answers? Probably not. But if we sat down and collaborated together a little bit, maybe we could find some reasonable solutions. Like I said, we finally got our foot in the door with the Great Lakes Commission, and both Alex and Ryan have done very well to steer us in that right direction. It's not new. We've been trying to do that since the 90s. So it's just a very slow process. Politics, people's views. So man is just doing it to himself is the reality. What I am doing is trying to document as much as I can that I know of my lifetime and plan on leaving that behind.